Welcome everybody to this meeting of London Futurists, where I'm going to be sharing some highlights of a conference that took place in France 2 weeks ago called TransVision, but also passing on some of my own thoughts from that conference and more generally my thoughts over the last few months as to the increasing impact of technology on society. And if I can summarize it briefly, as technology accelerates more and more, there will of course be many good side effects for individuals, but there's going to be a lot of challenge and disruption for society as a whole. And I'll cover what these challenges will be, but I'll also cover responses that we can take. You may recognize most of the words on this opening slide. I would like to say a few minutes to start off with about one of them, which may be less familiar to some of you at least, this phrase transhumanism. And there's a cartoon that sort of leads into the notion of transhumanism, which is a famous cartoon by the cartoonist Patrick Hardin, who drew this chain of beings. Eat, survive, reproduce. Eat, survive, reproduce. All the way to you, or me, or your cousin, who, what's it all about? And the cartoon pokes fun at the human because the human doesn't understand that it's all about eating, surviving and reproducing. But the cartoon also leaves open the possibility that there is more ahead, that we can step aside from our historical destiny and we can do something better in the future, as this picture here shows. It is that we don't know what that future involves. It could be a lot of technology involved. People go mad in Photoshop with these pictures. There's another version here in which we will become cyborgs, in which we will replace a lot of our biology with technology of one sort or another. And if you're differently inclined, you might point a picture of evolution like this instead, in which we transcend into some kind of being of light, in which some of our experiences are enhanced in tremendous ways. And each of these are different ways of talking about a possible transhuman future. And if we go to the transhumanist frequently asked question list from the Humanity Plus website, it gives this nice definition of transhumanism. It's a way of thinking about the future, so it's a futurist approach, appropriate for this gathering, in which the premise is that human species in its current form, that's you and me today, does not represent the end of development, so it doesn't stop with us, but it's a comparatively early phase. And so the distance that separates us from, say, the primates or from the mammals, similar things might happen in the relatively near future with post-humans, in which we will be transcending our human limitations. Or to use the words of philosopher Max More, who was originally from Britain, has been in America for many years. He said this in 1990, his definition of transhumanism. It's a class of philosophies. It's not just one type of philosophy. So there are many types of transhumanists, but they share in common that we seek the continuation and acceleration of the evolution of intelligent life, not through biology, but through our own direction of it. Taking advantage of science and technology, but being guided by life-promoting principles and values. And I'll have a few words to say in this talk about how science and technology are evolving, and certainly then we'll come back to what should be the right life-affirming principles and values to guide us as we go forward. So I don't know if anybody in this room would say, yes, I'm a transhumanist, or they would say, no, I'm not a transhumanist. I think there's at least 4 reasons why people might say, no, I'm not a transhumanist, with this definition in mind. You might say, for example, that humans are the final state. You might have a religious viewpoint, a particular kind of religious viewpoint, in which said, mankind as created is in the image of God, and the ideas of radically changing it is in violation to the holy books of Scripture or whatever. I don't take that very seriously, but there is a secular version of it which says actually it'd be better if we didn't make life more complicated. It'd be better if we didn't have more technology. It'd be better if we went back to a simpler, more sustainable future. In that case, the transhumanist vision, from this point of view, is a kind of going in the wrong direction. Transhumanists look at an evolution which will make us stronger, smarter, longer lived, they would prefer if there weren't so many humans, or at least not using so many resources. That's one viewpoint, which I don't take that seriously for reasons I'll explain. There is a second viewpoint, however, and says, yes, it's true. In the long future, humans will evolve further with technology, but the kinds of changes that many transhumanists speak of are too far into the future. And there's actually a distraction from more pressing concerns. If we think about regenerative medicine, if we think about significantly enhancing our intelligence, that's not going to happen in the foreseeable future. We should concentrate instead upon the problems of everyday, the hunger, the disease, the inequality, the climate change, and so forth. So I'm going to argue against this in my slides ahead. I'm going to argue that actually there is many potential things within the lifetimes of most of the people in this room, hopefully, that within a couple of decades there will be, within our grasp, very significant human enhancements. So I don't accept this rejection of transhumanism. There is a third way in which people will oppose transhumanists. They will say, you know, yeah, it's true, we have this power in our hands, but if we apply it, things are likely to go badly wrong. You know, we humans, we got something called Murphy's Law. Things will be messed up in unpredictable ways. We might take control of nanotechnology, but nanotechnology may have bad things. We might do genetically modified food, we might use synthetic biology, but it will turn out to be something we deeply regret. People might be smarter, but they'll be crueler rather than kinder, and society will be more damaged or diminished in various ways. And this is a criticism, personally, I take quite seriously. I think there is a big potential that as in the next couple of decades we are doing more and more with technology, we will do many things that we regret, or we might regret if we're not careful. There is a fourth reason to oppose transhumanism, which is a viewpoint that says any ism is a kind of mistake. And I had this at Paris, at the conference I'm going to talk about. This was from Aubrey de Grey, who is certainly believing in bringing new kinds of health to people, returning people in their middle age to youthful vigor. That's his vision, that people could live indefinitely. But he doesn't want to promote the idea of an ism. He says it's scary. And rather than talking about enhancing human nature, which makes people say, ooh, I'm not sure about that, enhancing human nature, we should talk instead about technology. It's going to enhance human happiness. And that's again a fourth reason not to be I'm a transhumanist. So I have mixed views about this. I think that yes, we should promote the positive, tangible benefits of new technology, that we will be happier, and we will have more abundance, material abundance, and we'll have more experiences. But I think inevitably the question of human nature will come up, and as soon as you start talking in any length about the transformational possibilities of technology, people start realizing by themselves, hey, this is scary. It is going to change human nature, isn't it? And at that stage, the transhumanists need to be able to say, yes, actually, the changing of nature is a natural thing in its own right, you know? We're just speeding it up. So 4 reasons for and against transhumanism. So before I go any further, does anybody want to say, yes, they're not a transhumanist because of X, Y, Z? They think transhumanism is a dangerous idea? After all, Francis Fukuyama, who is a very eminent philosopher, said a few years ago that transhumanism might be the world's most dangerous idea. Why? Because we will go badly wrong. We will put power in the hands of dictators to do terrible things to people. Mark, so are you for or against? Or
transhumanist philosophies are great, and I'm a human.
You're a human?
And so a human is actually able to be any way we choose to be. We create how we're being. So I'm a human, and I love transhumanists, a lot of the transhumanist philosophy.
So you're saying human nature is, in any case, to change. Human nature is not static. Brian?
Transhumanism as a term seems to be often defined as what transhumanism is not. So defining something by what it's not, often in the transhumanist circles I found it, kind of is like I go, well, so what I've come up with is transhumanitarian. So I'm happy to be a transhumanitarian, and as transhumanists kind of figure out what transhumanism actually is. I'm just going to be happy to sit there, because humanitarianism isn't so bad, and the transcension of a humanitarianism that's even better, well, I kind of like that.
I tried to say here in a positive light.
No, but it's all,
We favour the continuation and acceleration. We're going to do it with science and technology and by emphasising life, promoting principles and values. So there's a positive view. Yes?
I think whether or not we are or there is transhumanism, the pressures are that we are driving towards some kind of accelerations. And so I think our role should be to try to shape those in a way that's most balanced between the various
this is going to happen.
Aesthetic values we have.
There's so many, there's so much momentum behind technology.
I personally find the kind of like techno, let's say, blind kind of positivism of the early transhumanist movement had a little bit naive, I mean more than a little bit naive, but at the same time I think it's the best we got right now. So.
Okay. Yes?
Do you think that the philosopher Nietzsche was a futurist?
So I'm not an expert on Nietzsche. I know he had this notion of a Superman or Übermensch.
Yeah.
So I'm not really prepared to say whether that is transhumanist or not. And I know people have said that he pre-configured certain transhumanist ideas.
Yeah.
Yes. It's beyond my capabilities, I'm afraid. Yes.
Just a comment. If you look at a technology like nuclear technology, it's what's important is a kind of the motivation behind it.
Yes.
So it's not just transhumanism per se, but what's driving it. So if it's driven by the American military, it might have one outcome. If it's driven by a desire to help humanity, it could have another outcome.
So indeed, so the question is which principles and values are driving it. And I will come at the end to talk about, is it going to be transhumanism for the 1% or transhumanism for the 100%? And I think there are many scenarios in the future in which it will be for a comparative minority that takes advantage of these futures. So I've covered what transhumanism is. Let's look at TransVision, which was this conference that took place in Paris 2 weeks ago. Largely in the French language and largely with a French audience, although there are a few British or Americans there. Some of you might recognize James Hughes, the former executive director of the World Transhumanist Association. Who else? Natasha Vitamore, Anders Sandberg, Eamon Twyman, Aubrey de Grey, and there's myself. Right, so we were there speaking in English with simultaneous translators, but most of the discussion was in French. And it was on this theme, transhumanism face à la question sociale. Transhumanism faces social issues, according to Google Translate. And there was a lot of discussion of liberty, equality, fraternity, as you might expect there. And there were, well done to the organisers, they had brought a lot of critics of transhumanism who basically said, amongst other things, you guys are so naive, this is never going to come about in anything like the timescales you have in mind. Fortunately, the critics hadn't read much of the transhumanist literature, but at least it was good that they were there. Because if they had read the transhumanist literature, they would have found, I think, good answers to most of what they were saying. But they were engaging with the discussion. And the organisers, lead organiser down here, Mark Rowe, just sent me a note this morning on the press feedback, because they had managed to bring many journalists there. More than 20 articles have been published in various French magazine, newspapers and radio, including one headline front page article on the Metro News, which is what you get given out in the Metro, which apparently is read more widely than Le Monde. Various other articles in Le Figaro and so forth. And there were 5 different film crews there, producing documentaries which are meant to air on France to art and so forth. So I had various cameras pushed in front of me over that time, and Natasha Vitamore told me she had 9 different interviews in a short space of time. And we had good results, and here we are on the front page of the Metro. The French transhumanists want to come out of the shadow. They've been in the shadow for a long time. And here's Natasha saying, one day we will all have an alternative body. If you want a new body, whether it's one of these made out of robots or made out of synthetic biology. So lots of coverage. Now, TransVision has a history. Yates was mentioning about the prehistory of transhumanism. This is the first photograph I could find of a TransVision. It's a bit grainy, because in these olden times we didn't always have great photographs. You might notice a few things about this picture. Very male-dominated. I can't quite tell from the photograph, but I think every single person there is male. There's a couple there at the end who look like they're tweeting, hey, I'm just in the first TransVision. But of course this was 1998, long before there was any mobile phones that could tweet. And so I don't know quite what they were doing, not paying attention to the photographer. I think this is a canal in the background in Visp, just outside Amsterdam in the Netherlands, in which they gathered together the first European gathering of transhumanists, with at least one British person there, Gareth Smith, who's not here today, but he was talking there about cryonics. This gentleman was there too. I don't know if you know who that is, anybody? Looks a bit different nowadays. Lost some of his hair in the meantime. This is Nick Bostrom, who is now a professor of philosophy at Oxford University. He's talking about an organisation he just formed, the World Transhumanist Association, which I now sit on the board. He's Swedish originally, and there was various social gatherings. Some of you might recognise the face on here. This is young Anders Sandberg, who is speaking here in 6 weeks' time. And he was also at the TransVision in Paris last week. He gave such a fantastically interesting speech. I asked him to come and do a longer extended version of it here. So in 6 weeks' time, not in this room probably, but somewhere in this building. And
it's about how to apportion minds.
It's about how to apportion minds. It's about equality and so forth. And he was quoted afterwards saying something with a good futurist vision. He said, this is the start of something great. And indeed, there will be many other TransVisions. One in Sweden the next year, organised by himself, together with Valdemar Engdahl. They had a lovely picture there, and the slogan, what do you want to be tomorrow? Not what do you want to do, not where do you want to go, not what operating system do you want to use, but what do you want to be in terms of morphological freedom. What comes next after TransVision 99? TransVision MM, which actually took place just along the road here at UCL. Now this is not a photograph of that conference, because I couldn't find any. There's probably too many women in it, in this photograph, of that conference at that time. But it was organised by Garrett, and they had the usual kind of vision. You know, we want to gather people who are interested in how technology will free us from biological limitations such as death, disease, and unhappiness. But, very interestingly, and true to the TransVision principle, they also went straight on and said, by the way, there are many possible bad side effects here. We need to watch out for dangers of war or other accidents with this technology. So I'm not going to go through the whole history, but after these first few meetings, there were events in Berlin, Yale in Connecticut, Toronto, Canada, Venezuela, Finland. I will pause here because that's the first I personally attended and where I first spoke and where I first met many of these people. Chicago, Milan, and Paris. You may notice that there's fewer of them, but that's because, in a sense, it's only a part of the story. There were many other transhumanist conferences going on too, including in the west coast of America. This is the picture that was used to publicize some of the Extropy Institute events in California, led by Max Moore, that I mentioned earlier. You'll notice these are all European or at least East Coast America. And there's a slightly different spirit in the West Coast, praise the Lord, of great positivity and individualism. And there were Humanity Plus conferences, which are still ongoing. There's been Humanity Plus conferences in Britain, 2010, which I helped to organise. And also a whole bunch of conferences with the name Singularity Summit, with some of the same people involved. Singularity, talking about accelerating technology and rapid change. And there was a remarkable Singularity Summit, in fact, also taking place 2 weeks ago, almost overlapping with the TransVision in Paris, which I managed to attend at least the first day. Very, very interesting. I will have some slides from that too. I managed to take some slides to add to the flavour of where this is all going. So that's a kind of TransVision history. I do want to talk a little bit more now about the technology involved, because technology is what makes all this relevant. If technology is not going as fast as we think it is, then a lot of these discussions are a distraction, and we'd better concentrate on more nearby features. So I want to spend a little bit of time on some of the radical changes in technology in just, say, the last 10 years. What are your thoughts on some of the most radical changes in technology in the last 10 years? Mark?
Connectivity through social medias.
Yeah, so there wasn't much social media. There was the internet, but nothing like as many people were actively involved online at that stage, yes? Facebook is just over 10 years old, for example.
YouTube?
YouTube is also less than 10 years old. In fact, it's a lot less than 10 years. Yes?
A vast improvement in telecommunications technology?
Vast improvement in telecommunication, yes?
When DNA was designed.
Say again?
DNA, was it before 10 years ago?
DNA was, well, I've got a slide about DNA, yeah, exactly so. Yes?
I think just recently they've got this new way they can take out genes and put in bad bits of genes and put in new bits of genes.
Exactly so. So it's programming genes rather than just reading them. Yes, I've got a bit about that too. So I mean, this is one of my favourites. In 2005, the storage industry was already very mature. It had been improving for a long time. And it was remarkable in 2005 that you could store 128 megabytes on there. But 9 years later, they would put 1,000 times more storage into the same space and for the same price. So
actually, it was 850 just came out. 850 gigabytes.
I need to update my slides.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, you can't keep up. That's the problem. You know, your slides are always out of date when you do this. There are a few seats still at the back if you want to come in. One over there and a few more at the back. Right. And then there's this remarkable sequence change in biology. This is tracking how much does it cost to sequence an entire human genome. And 2001, it cost a remarkable $100 million to sequence an entire genome. So you had to be very rich indeed to do that. Most people wouldn't do it. It took a long time as well. And it came down at the same speed for a while as a semiconductor improvement. You can see that 6 years later, it had already come down tenfold, which is roughly a doubling every 2 years. But about this time, more and more people said, my goodness, this is going to be important. My goodness, if we really can't understand the whole personal genome, there could be great implications for medicine, there could be great benefits for the pharmaceutical industry. So suddenly a whole lot of more people applied themselves to this, many new techniques were formed, and by just 4 more years later, it had come down 1,000-fold. So speeding up much faster even than Moore's Law. And so we're well on the track here for coming down to about $1,000. So in the last 10 years, I've tracked here what Moore's Law would give us. Moore's Law, in that 10 years, is about 7 generations of Moore's Law in the last 10 years, which means if you split that up, that's 128 times, which means you can make things go 5 times faster and 5 times cheaper and 5 times smaller. And so that's why we've got the Kindle coming from nowhere, tablets, many more smartphones than before, as was mentioned, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, which we all take for granted now, but can you imagine a time when you didn't wake up in the morning to photographs and videos of cats doing incredible things? Once upon a time this did not happen. Khan Academy is another example which builds on YouTube. You know, now so many people around the world can take advantage of free education, but it wasn't anything like possible 10 years ago. And Wikipedia did exist 10 years ago, but there were very few articles in it. If I go back in my email to the first time I used Wikipedia, according to my email, it's about 2005. So dramatic changes in the last 10 years, which means it's no surprise that people predict even more changes in the next 10 years, because there are good reasons to think that overall the technology engine is going to keep improving. There's Babson put on their advertisement very boldly. They said of the Fortune 500 companies today, 40% of them will no longer be here in just 10 years. The Fortune 500 is not a small company, it's a major company, but they'll have fallen from grace. And some people think even that is an underestimate. This emeritus professor from Yale, Richard Foster, said a long time ago in the 1920s, companies would tend to hang around in the Standard & Poor 500 for 67 years, it's just 15 years today. And looking ahead, he said in just 8 years' time, maybe 75%, forget 40%, 75% of the stock S&P 500 will be companies that we have not heard of. So much change is likely in such a short time. Will your companies or will your industry still be significant in 10 years' time? As a futurist, I wish I had a crystal ball and I could look and say for sure. All I can say as a futurist, and all I encourage you as a futurist to do as well, is to think harder about the set of possible futures. That's what we should do. We can't say for any likelihood this will happen in a particular date and time, but we can lay out that set of possible futures with the threats that are out there. We have to help people to see beyond the issues of the present day, which tend to preoccupy us. You know, we are, by evolution, we were programmed to think about short-term things, because if we didn't think about short-term things, we would be a tiger's lunch, or we would lose out on the mating opportunities. So look out for the threats, which might come sooner than we expect, and look out for the opportunities, because they might disappear out of our grasp if we are not fast enough. So that's what we futurists are trying to do, trying to make these future pictures understandable, try and figure out what's real and what's not real, what's credible and what's just science fiction, and then to highlight and say, look over there. And the general public will say, I will look over there, but I'm too busy with dancing on ice for the time being, or I'm too busy wondering about my present day. I've got to make my figures for the next quarter. And I'll look over there, there's something important. So if we do that properly. I think this is a hard task, even getting harder, because after all, things are speeding up. I think more is happening in a shorter space of time, and it's also speeding up because of convergence. Convergence means you think you've got something well mapped out, you know roughly what's going, and suddenly there's an even faster technology coming in from the outside. Hence, there was a certain speed in which the DNA reading was improving. Hi Alex, there might be a seat right in the corner over there. There might be a certain speed at which the DNA was improving, and then extra technologies from extra fields came in and speeded it up. There's convergence not only of technologies, there's convergence of risks, which means that not just that good things might compound, but also bad things might compound. So we need to get better at futurism, hence that's why I'm running London Futurists. And I think the motto, which I quite like, is making some of these credible futures vivid, so that people are more easily able to understand and feel and appreciate the nature of these threats and opportunities. I think the most important word on this slide is convergence, because convergence is what's going to give us a whole lot of new opportunities and a whole lot of new threats. And I would like to spend maybe the next 5 minutes or so looking at some convergences in more detail. Starting with this one, NBIC. It's not a television channel. NBIC? Yeah? Anybody know what that means? Nano, bio... Cogno, info, yes. Exactly. So nanotech, which is to deal with increasing ability to manipulate atoms. Biotech is our increasing ability to manipulate biology, the hardware of biology, including what's going on in the genes. Info and communications is what I've been talking about, the ability to store bits, or to communicate bits, or to compute with bits. And cognotech is the ability to understand what's going on in the brain or in other mental systems, as we understand the connectivity between neurons of different sorts. And if you like, the left-hand side of this chart is to do with physics, and the right-hand side is to do with biology. If you like, the top half is to do with hardware, and the bottom half is to do with software. But in reality, it's the connectivity between the different areas that makes things really difficult to predict. Because enhancements and nano placement of silicon, and we can now increasingly place them 3D, will improve our ability to manipulate bits. The scanners will mean that we can understand the brain better. By understanding the brain better, we can build better ICT, and we can apply some of the same software technology to enhance our manipulation of genes. Where's this all going? Where's it heading? It's very hard to predict. That's why people just sometimes draw a black hole and say, well, it's a kind of a singularity, and singularity means our predictive powers break down. That's not what I'm doing in this talk. I'm not going to talk about the singularity, but I am going to talk about what is likely to happen concretely in the next 10 or 20 years. That's the big diagram. But I want to try to split it up more specifically into 4 great convergences of the next 10 years. 4 great convergences, which makes transhumanism all the more relevant and all the more important that we think about these things. So the first of these convergences is that between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. But today's artificial intelligence, if you get Siri on your iPhone, you can easily make Siri look a bit stupid, and it's quite fun to do that. But increasingly, Siri is able to answer back and do more than you expect. Increasingly, artificial intelligence is also going beyond rationality and is able to do creative things, such as writing music. You know, once upon a time we'd say, well, computers will never manage to make music that moves the soul. To do that, you need to have a soul. You need to be human. But this software engineer and musician, David Cope, has written software which on the press of a button is able to generate new music in the style of any composer from the past you wish that there's got records of. So it's able to create music in the style of Chopin and music in the style of Bach. And if you then take this music to another music expert and you play 2 or 3 bits of music to them, some of which are actually lesser known pieces by Chopin and some of which are generated, the expert musicians can't tell the difference anymore. It's a kind of a Turing test of a sort. So creativity is coming along in leaps and bounds. In 1999, the futurist Ray Kurzweil, in his book The Age of Spiritual Machines, which by the way is one of the reasons, when I read it shortly after that, was one of the reasons I thought, my goodness, I have to pay attention to this future. Here's this magnificent cartoon in which is somebody championing the uniqueness of humanity. And this person has said, right, only humans can beat chess, you know? And for a long time, that was thought to be true. Douglas Hofstadter, in his very famous book, The Mind's Eye, which I read as an undergraduate, I thought, what a fantastic book. He was emphatic in that. He was the writer on scientific matters, recreational mathematics for the Scientific American. He was emphatic that computers can never fathom enough about chess. And even in 1996, Garry Kasparov, the great chess grandmaster, he said when the proposition was put to him that the computer would beat him, he said, "This is crap." I mean, he said it amongst other things. And so now, in 1997, he was beaten, and routinely all the best champion players in the world can be beaten by computers. What else is written down here? Only computers can compose in the style of Bach. Just had that. And when this book was written, there was something up on the wall still. Only humans can drive cars. Driving a car is very difficult, and many people went to great lengths to prove that computers had never managed to drive cars. And the first few who tried made a terrible mess of it. The first DARPA Grand Challenge, how far would they drive? I think they all crashed or ran out of direction in just a short space of time. But a few years later, they were going much further, and now they can drive pretty well. Not as completely as well as humans in all circumstances, but we're going there. So this trend is moving. And the trend is taken further by this supercomputer, Watson, which was designed by IBM. Many of you know this story, that it was designed to do word game puzzles. Because people said, oh right, chess, yeah, we used to think chess required creativity, but now we know that chess is just algorithms and brute force. But you know, when you talk, there are so many subtle nuances of language, so many puns, so many things. Computers could never manage that. And so there's an American quiz show, which I've never seen on TV, but many people have, called Jeopardy, in which the questions are actually answers, and the answer is a question. You've got to come up with an answer that matches what you've been told. And here are the 2 best humans ever, Ken Jennings, I forget this gentleman's name, and they were in this contest a few years ago with Watson, and Watson did manage to play the game better than any of them. And what did Watson do? Watson was not connected live to the internet. It was not doing searches while the quiz show was going. It had read lots of books beforehand. It had read the entire contents of Wikipedia. It did not have a human telling it what it all meant. It just read stuff that humans had written for other humans, and it was able to make sense of it. And now people say, oh, this is just word games. You know, any computer can do word games. It's not useful at all, you know, the defenders of humanity. And so IBM is saying, well, we're going to apply the same learning in the field of clinical medicine. We will take the same ability to read large amounts of data, to spot patterns, and we'll apply it there. And because after all, when you get a complex clinical case, doctors have got to read a lot of data. They've got to read the entire contents of your medical records, which often include multiple different doctors. And research publications come out at a tremendous rate. Once upon a time, there was only a few journals that doctors needed to keep up with. Now there's far too many for even the best doctor to keep up on top. You've got to be able to discern patterns. And people would originally say it was only humans who could discern patterns. But I think the computers, like Watson's, able to do it. And what Watson, in this circumstance, he doesn't say I don't know, it doesn't just say, this is the answer. Often it will say, I think in order to figure out what's really wrong with this person, we need to do this additional test. And it's able to explain its hypothesis to humans. And when the human says, why do you think this? It's able to say, well, because of this and this and this. and the humans are able to go and read that same literature and agree or disagree. And occasionally the humans will override the computer, in which case it can modify its theories and learn. And so this is an example of this convergence between artificial intelligence and computer intelligence. The two fields of medical science and cognitive science are both being transformed by that. Stephen.
David, one thing I would add to that, though, is this rise of big data. You talked about being able to sequence the human genome for $1,000 in a day or two,
yeah,
which is not far off. You start to add that on with RNA-seq, mutational analysis. You know, machine-based learning is fundamentally going to change medical sciences because the amount of data that doctors are now having to troll through is just too large for a human brain to comprehend at all. Trying to pick through all of that data and pull out what are the most salient features of that and how you can use that to guide diagnosis is becoming a burden. And so this rise of big data and machine-based learning is another thing that's really going to impact on this.
And additionally, just to add to that, additionally, the level of studies, clinical studies, papers being published are going more and more into that big data. So just that to augment what gentlemen said.
So it's not just the better intelligence of the actual thinking part, it's the better analytics and better systems to analyze huge amounts of data, which hasn't been done before.
We don't have a chance. Humans don't have a chance of doing that.
Well, humans couldn't do that, but now of course we can do it faster because we've got our silicon allies who we're converging with to do it for us. Joe?
And Watson now is partnering with Siri, isn't it? So that will bring to day-to-day activities all this kind of power, or becoming more usable for everyone, everyday usage.
Yeah. So what IBM have done is they've opened up many of the APIs. So it used to run on a big superconductor, a supercomputer rather, which now is accessible over the cloud, so that you can access it from a mobile phone. And I mean, already when you talk to Google Now or Siri, it does a little bit of understanding on your device, it sends the rest of it up to the cloud, and it comes down again, it goes through various stages of processing. So this is becoming more widely applicable. So much so that this guy, Vinod Khosla, co-founder of Sun Microsystems, one of the leading VCs in Silicon Valley, has said that 80% of doctors will be replaced by technology within 10 years. Or more precisely, the 80% of what doctors do now will be done better and cheaper, more reliably by machines and algorithms. So if you're a doctor, you still have a bit to do, but you may not be able to command the same heavy price fee. We'll come back to that later. So that is the first of these four great convergences which are going to change life in many ways in the next 10 years. Deep machine learning. And Facebook and Google and others, it's no surprise, they are creating AI labs all over the place. Facebook has created 3 AI labs. What do they want to do? Not just to recognize your face when they come up in a photo, but also to just understand what you're likely to be thinking of and how can they sell you more things, make you click on things. What exactly is the kind of cat video that I'm likely to click on rather than somebody else likely to click on? So deep machine learning and hybrid intelligence, where if we do it right, we will be partnering with these great brains rather than being in second place to these great brains. But that's only one of these 4 great convergences. The second great convergence I point to is between human and machine, not so much in the brains, but in terms of, well, if we go back a few years, this is some pictures I used to use in my days at Symbian in the smartphone industry. We're used to having this kind of interaction with our devices. What's coming next increasingly is intelligence in our visual field. I don't think many people will be wearing this, because you can't get a date if you wear one of these things. Well, maybe she might get a date, but most other people probably can't get dates if you wear these. But the next generation and the next generation are going to become so much more straightforward. So we are moving from mobile to wearable. And there's a lot I could say about wearable computing. It's now in the present state that mobile was about 10 or 12 years ago. Just a few slides on what wearable computing might do. This is a very simple one that fits in your back, and when it detects it, you're sitting slouched, a little bit like your mother. It gives a little kind of tickle to your back, and you sit up straight and you smile because you just sit up straight. You know, that's one aspect of wearable computing. Wearable computer can make us run faster as well as smarter. This thing can make you run it up to 40 kilometers an hour if you're on the right road and if nobody's in your way. In Daewoo in South Korea, this is a real human being in here. in an exoskeleton that magnifies his muscle power very significantly. And the suit itself is heavy, but it's self-sustaining. And as he moves, the suit moves. And when he picks up something heavy, he feels he's picking it up, but he feels it's something light which he can manipulate. So wearable technology is going to wearable robots. You get things on your skin which have got lots of electronics built in, just the size of 2 postage stamps. Why would you do this? So it's there giving you feedback on, potentially on, especially if you've got a condition that might cause palpitations or a relapse of some sort. And as people say, once this wearable tech saves your life, you won't take it off. So you can monitor your babies, you can monitor yourself. And what's next? Well, it goes inside the body. And these are some x-rays of some pioneers, brave people. What have they got in here? They have got some small RFIDs, about this size. So it's not completely invisible, and you can just about feel it, you know, if you're there. After I've got one, I'm not that kind of early adopter. And why would you do such a thing to yourself? Why would you give yourself the mark of the beast in such a sense? And some critics allege, well, in part because you might unlock doors with it. You don't need to carry keys anymore. It's got an RFID thing. It's like when you go in the tube, you just wave your card over the thing. You might unlock your PC or your smartphone. No fears anymore about somebody seeing what PIN code you're typing in. Or you might store bitcoins on it. Or, goodness knows, ... The unexpected things will come down. So rather than explore that further, let me just say this is the second great trend, moving from mobile to wearable to insidables, and in which we increasingly become cyborgs. We will all become the $6 billion man or woman, except we won't cost $6 billion in due course. So some of this at least will be happening within the next 10 years and more of it later. I'll just rush through 2 more great convergences, which we could say a lot about too. The third one is software and biology, in which more and more of the techniques and thinking that applies to software can be applied in biology, including reading the genetic code, and not only reading it, which is this curve, which I showed you earlier on, but these are curves from Rob Carlson, pioneer of synthetic biology. There's another curve on here in which he tracks the decreasing cost of writing DNA. So as was mentioned earlier, not only can we understand what our genes are doing, but at least in some cases, we can knock out bad sequences of genes and we can introduce new sequences of genes. Sometimes to restore something that's faulty in a person, and increasingly to give us skills or attributes that we didn't have before. There is already some example in mice in which elderly mice are given some genetic reprogramming, and some parts at least of their blood and their muscle show some of the signs of being younger again. So what we're seeing here is, as this article in The Economist showed, with this cartoon and man-made life, in which Adam, with a laptop strategically positioned, is sending the spark of life in the opposite direction. And we are seeing things like stem cell therapies, in which we are able to take normal cells and revert them in some circumstances to stem cells, which means they are much more plastic, and then they can be turned in turn into other kinds of stem cells. So the start of regenerative medicine, in which we don't have to wait in due course for a kidney. If we've got a faulty kidney, we don't have to wait for somebody to die to give us a kidney, but we can actually look at growing these things out of stem cells. I don't know when that might happen, but I think there will be at least enhancements in the next 10 years. We can use genetic engineering to increasingly choose our children, or choose aspects of our children, design their babies, which is slightly interesting for me, but I'm much more interested in using genetic engineering to redesign myself at the right time, in which I can change my own genetic makeup. Is it going to be hard and difficult? Absolutely, but the trends are there. So that people talk about rejuveneering, people such as Aubrey de Grey in this Ending Aging. And so there is hope for me. I might end up looking like this one day if I'm rejuvenated. Some of you might want to look something different. And as Natasha Vitamore mentioned at the beginning, you know, there is an alternative body for each of us in the future by this technology. So that's the third great convergence, software and biology. Synthetic biology means we can create new biological forms. And if you think back to what happened with synthetic chemistry was when people learned how to make new plastics, new compounds. compounds for clothing, compounds for all kinds of processes. It completely transformed society 150 years ago or so, and since then. So synthetic biology has the potential to remake things again in such a large way. And the fourth convergence is convergence between the physical world and the virtual world, in which more and more of us expend more of our time in the virtual world and also see the real world too. If you haven't seen this short video from Magic Leap, it is worth tracking down Magic Leap. They're a kind of second generation augmented reality company. This is a concept, but if you wear their glasses, you see your own hand and you can see a dancing elephant in the palm of your hand. And you say, why would anybody want a dancing elephant in the palm of their hand? You know, it's nice and cute, it's the new kitten of the next few years, but you can merge things together. There are all kinds of industrial applications, as well as entertaining your children. Here's another slide from the Magic Leap demo. And a lot of clever, intelligent companies such as Qualcomm and Google have invested very heavily in this technology. Is this technology going to succeed or not? I can't say, but something like it probably will, in which we spend more of our time with goggles on, because it's a wonderful world that we can experience there.
And Facebook.
So Facebook have invested in the Oculus Rift, which is virtual reality goggles. And why are they doing that? Because it is a tremendous experience when you're in these goggles. You imagine you've gone somewhere totally different. So there is a nice video of the grandmother of one of the Oculus Rift programmers, who's in her late 90s, getting one of these Oculus Rift goggles on. She's somewhere in the Midwest in America, and with these goggles she's transported back to Provence in France, where she had been many years earlier, and she walks around and she sees things moving, and her reaction is, now that she's seen this, she definitely wants to live another 10 years, you know, because it's going to be even better in 10 years' time. A lovely, homely, enchanting video, if you haven't seen it.
I think there's Elders React to Oculus Rift. There's Elders React, so a YouTube series of old people reacting to strange YouTube things, but they're reacting to Oculus Rift. So that's also worth watching.
Right. Yes. And some of it freaks them out, but some of it really enchants them. So we have to figure out what's the right content for them. For us. Some of us are nearly seen this already. So, and I don't have time to go look at how physical experience such as education is being transformed by massive online open courses, and the whole world of currency is being transformed by online currencies and so forth. But I will say all of these convergences are happening, and the most difficult thing is to figure out how these four convergences are themselves converging together. And that's what makes things hard. But if I step back, I see this, that there is this accelerating technology. There are more and more people who know about technology. They're being trained in technology around the world. There are developers from India, from China, from Philippines, from sub-Saharan Africa, who are part of this positive feedback cycle. More and more people learning about technology. More technology is being created which other people can build on. More tools, more wikis, more open source software. And it will give us the potential to enhance humans in all kinds of ways, whether it's more intelligence, more health, more years of life, more experience, more choice, more opportunity. So I think this is more or less an inevitable outcome, with a couple of provisos that I'll come to shortly. That something like this will be possible to enhance humans. But as I've been hinting along the way, at the same time, this is disturbing for many aspects of humanity. We haven't talked about it yet, but there are potential for worse terrorism. You know, all these powerful weapons, if they get into the hands of angry people, upset people, alienated people, people perhaps who've been led into various acts by their ideology, whether it's a religious ideology or a secular ideology, they can do terrible things. And governments can do terrible things too. Governments can spy on us more than ever before. Corporations can spy on us more than ever before. We seem to be, with all our technology, having bad effects on the climate. I think 2014 is now confirmed as the warmest year ever. So whatever people were saying about a kind of a break in the increase in temperature, that seems to have reversed. 2014, the warmest year ever. And all these robots that are doing jobs, what's going to happen to the 80% or 90% of people who no longer have work to do? So lots of challenges for human society, challenges for the relations between humans, and lots of potential for existential risks. So I say absolutely the potential is that this technology will benefit at least some individuals, but also threatens the well-being of society. So this is what I presented in my talk in Paris, and there's various discussion that arises. So I'll take a bit of discussion now, and then we'll open it up for more feedback before I dive more in. So some of the discussion is, you know, there's nothing inevitable about this, and certainly I agree. Timescales are open, and who knows how these different billiard balls of technologies are going to bump into each other. It's not going to happen straightforwardly. It's going to require a lot of hard work and clever work, inspiration and perspiration from individuals and companies, academics, researchers all over the world. Then I heard, well, you transhumanists, you all think it's all going to happen inevitably in 2045, don't you? And I've read the book from your Pope, Ray Kurzweil, who says that. And I say, for goodness sake, that's not what transhumanism is all about. We don't have a Pope. We don't... We see the curves, and we see, well, various things will potentially happen by certain times, but we realize there's an awful lot of hard work between the underlying potential and the actual application. So no, we don't. Timing is open. And people say, well, it's bound to falter. You know, in the past, every set of technologies came to an end. You know, skyscrapers got taller and taller, and then after the Empire State Building, they stopped getting taller. Supersonic airliners, jet airliners, they got faster and faster until they got slower. And in fact, we no longer take jetliners as fast as Concorde. So all of these things are bound to come to an end. And I say, I think that's unlikely. And that's my argument for the last 10 slides or so. I think there is a huge amount of powerful momentum inside technology. And although we may not want one particular future application of technology, there'll be other ways in which it benefits. It makes so much sense to have more big data skills because there are so many benefits to it. It makes so much sense having better augmented reality because so many people benefit. So unless society collapses as a whole, which I don't rule out, so that's my proviso. So society could collapse if we don't handle these issues. If it continues, I think this will happen. And the fourth kind of reaction people say is, well, since this is so bad, you know what I'm going to do? Let's pull out the plug. Let's stop technology progress. Let's say we're gonna abstain. We're gonna stop developing all these things because it's got bad consequences. And I just don't think that's possible either. I think we're so much committed to the engines of technological progress that is out of consideration. As I said in Paris, incroyable. What is more likely, and I think there are two contrasting views that are possible. And this is where the discussion gets really interesting. There are some people who say, what we need to do is concentrate on these individuals. Concentrate on allowing individuals and corporations to enhance themselves. Make sure they can do research and development quickly. Make sure that free enterprise is not hindered. Make sure that governments don't get in the way with all their regulations and busybodying. And if we do all that, then these social problems, which are real, they'll be solved sort of as a consequence. Because technology, after all, could solve climate change because we should have renewable energy, or we should have fusion, or we should have geoengineering. So in due course, some of these enhancements to individuals are bound to solve these problems. This view has a name. It's called techno-libertarianism, which says let's focus on giving freedoms to individuals and companies to do what they would like. And much as I'm attracted to this view, I think there is another viewpoint, and this came out strongly in the discussions in Paris, which says that alongside encouraging smart research and development, alongside ensuring that corporations can work well, we also need some regulation and some governance, because otherwise things are likely to, in many ways, get worse. So we should need new social systems, dare I say it, which is frightening, because the libertarians, or the people who like this, don't want interference, they don't like government. Governments are stupid, governments are bad, governments are incompetent. Look at the United Nations, it's making a mess of things. They don't want new social systems. But I think we actually have to get involved in this aspect as well. And this viewpoint is sometimes called techno-progressive. So, about halfway through what I wanted to say. Let's have any comments or feedback so far. Any questions? Matt?
Yeah, just one very particular one on the decreasing costs of sequencing the genome.
Yeah.
It seems to have flattened out a bit, doesn't it?
It does seem to have flattened out.
Is there an explanation to that?
So if you look at the website, where that comes from, Rob Carlson, he says he's not completely sure what's going on, but it might be that actually the underlying costs are going down, but people are charging more money for it, because these are the prices rather than the costs. But there's nothing inevitable about how these curves continue. You might go actually Moore's law to a sense is slowing down because it's taking Intel longer to go to the next smaller nanometer architecture. But it's not a worry, because what's actually happening is they're going to 3D chipsets more and more. So there's a kind of it's not a straight line, there's a bump. Stephen, do you have any insight as to why that?
I mean, it's the cost of the machines themselves. So if you look at an Illumina 451, which is the major sequencer people use, these things cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. But you're absolutely right, David. What's happening now is miniaturization, which is going to speed up the processing of these things. They'll go much, much faster. So therefore, you've got more throughput. So the price will go down. People are anticipating it'll be £100 in 2 years, and you'll be able to do it in a day.
So despite that local change, it's like the local, and if you look in details at any of the curves of Moore's law, it sometimes slows down for a bit.
It's miniaturization. It's really going to be the driver.
Joe?
Yeah, I was going to comment exactly the Illumina example, because they bought Rothenberg out, isn't it? And they kind of holding the market with some price control. But the machines they sold to high longevity, these machines, they made about 1,000 per genome. I think they charge 10K. You just need to buy a 10K group, but it's about 1,000 per genome.
So it's almost affordable.
Yeah.
Although to some people.
And David,
Oksana?
Well, I definitely techno-progressive.
You're a techno-progressive. I was going to ask people to vote in a minute if they feel strongly on one way or the other. I'm biased, so I'm probably maybe spinning this one too strongly. But
well, I remember you recommended a book after one of the meetups called "Why Nations Fail."
Why Nations Fail, yeah.
Yeah, and the central message there was the most successful societies are the ones who build good institutions, and with the complexity ever increasing, we just cannot avoid, in my humble view, building smart institutions. I have a question though. During that discussion, did you go into those new social systems and what is emerging? What does it look like?
Not enough, although I have a couple of suggestions later on. And that is work that's outstanding. And Anders does have another presentation on new governance, which we'll get him to give some time. Callum?
I share your nervousness about the extreme techno-libertarians, people like Peter Thiel and so on. They're a little like Ayn Rand. But the idea that governments or any kind of regulatory body could work out in advance what technological advances are going to happen and when, work out how to govern them, and what all the unexpected consequences of that will be, and then avoid all those unexpected, unwanted consequences. I just think that's impossible.
But it's not what they're trying to do, though. I think they're trying to manage...
That's what smart governance means, isn't it?
I think what they're trying to do is what they always try to do, manage externalities. There is a problem of commons, or some things that just not managed because it falls through the cracks of libertarians.
Yeah, for sure. There's always
manage it in hindsight.
There's always market failure, but you're always managing the problem that's just happened. And in a world where technology is increasing at an exponential rate, that doesn't work.
The risk is that people solve yesterday's problems rather than tomorrow's
Well, the risk is they sort of semi-solve yesterday's problem, and by doing so, they completely wreck tomorrow's opportunity.
Stephen?
As somebody who's taken a technology through Parliament that initially the government wanted to completely ban, and then ultimately we passed a bill to allow it. I think having regulation, appropriate regulation, is valuable. If I look at cell-based therapies together with the FDA, it took them a long time to get their head around what do you wacko scientists want to do and how are we going to regulate this. 3D printing, they've just come out and said we know nothing about organ printing or 3D tissue printing. It's going to take us 2 or 3 years to get our heads around this. The scientific community has to come in and work with us to figure out what's the appropriate way to regulate this. So I agree, regulation is a good thing, particularly around technologies where you can't foresee what the negative consequences of that could be. And so you mitigate against it. And most good regulatory bodies don't want to try to stop the technologies from proceeding, but they want to try to control it in a way that benefits society optimally. That doesn't always work, but that's sort of the idea.
Andrew? No? You had your hand up earlier?
No.
No? All right. Yes, over here?
Yes, sort of building on various points. One of my biggest fears is that the society already seems to be on these two tracks, and this can very well kind of exponentiate it, because on one hand we are witnessing this exponential expansion in technologies. On the other hand, there are a lot of societies and peoples in the world that live without access to any of this, and in fact there are trends in the world that seem to be in a retrograde direction, completely kind of denying. So the world is already on two tracks, and the vast majority of people living not in a sort of Western, as a concept, not as a geography, world, seem to be suffering, in my view, from that, although they may have a different view. But even in our society, if we allow the extreme libertarian sort of philosophy to succeed and progress, we may be witnessing the situation where an elite of individuals in society will have all the benefit, whilst the rest will, because of the lack of access, will basically not have access to these.
So you've almost said what's on my next slide, which is from Robert Shiller, the Nobel Prize winner for economics last year, when he said the most important problem we are facing today now is rising inequality. He didn't say the most important problem is inequality. He said the most important problem is rising inequality. And we're going to debate this in the next few slides, because not everybody agrees, and many people will take issue with that. But Mark?
Can I just go back to the point that we were making earlier about biotech?
Yeah.
So the stagnation, the apparent stagnation in the genome. So right now we're very happy to invest. Many countries are investing heavily in decoding the genes of cancer, for example, or any of the technologies that are being used at the price that is available right now. And lots of projects are building very good models based on that, and including things like the microbiome. We're learning so much more about the functionality. So at the current prices, at the stagnation, we're doing a very good job.
Stagnation's only a temporary thing. So I think we're
okay, but what I'm saying is, at that stagnation point, we seem to be doing a lot and getting a lot of benefit for mankind out of it. It's wonderful.
So your point is interesting. Even if the price doesn't come down, the learning is improving, so we can get more bang from our buck without the technology changing. Olga?
Yeah, I just find it amusing that we are choosing between two approaches, but in reality, who are we to choose, frankly speaking? And it's like,
we don't choose who is, What we're afraid is that there's nobody driving the car.
True.
By itself.
But in a way, I mean, if you just kind of rewind, look at the beginning of 20th century, and a lot of technologies were emerging. And if somebody asks, what are you going to do about those technologies? Are you going to regulate them? Are you going to boost them and enhance them? I think things will happen the way they are supposed to happen. And where we have pockets of funding available with, let's say, little limiting regulations in place, you will have those technologies emerging at much faster pace. And then probably needs for regulations will be there. But I don't think we can stop this. I mean, it's almost naive for us to ask this question, is it going to be one or the other?
So there's nothing we can do to slow down or influence the development? Wow, lots of hands now. Alex?
No, just recently Ray Kurzweil made such prediction.
Who, sorry?
Ray Kurzweil made prediction.
Ray Kurzweil made a prediction, but he's not my fault, so I don't think...
I just would like to know your opinion about this. Is that we in 12, 14 years will achieve escape velocity.
Escape velocity?
Yes, in 12, 14 years. I think it's not possible.
What escape velocity?
You mean longevity and escape velocity? We can live long enough to live forever.
Yes.
12 to 14
In 12, 14.
Well, then Aubrey de Grey is the one who's looked hardest at this, and he always gives lots of probabilities.
I think it's not possible, it's not realistic.
So if various things happen, then things might go faster or not. So I think 10 to 12 years is on the lower ends of the possibility. You know, there might be breakthroughs, and we might discover extra connections between genes, but I'm dubious. I think it's going to take longer than that to make these progress. Yeah. Yates?
So I mean, one of these issues I think for me is a bit different from the others on the climate side, because in climate is not just climate, it's going to be water, pollution, many other issues that come along the way. And I think if you read about civilization collapses, and thinking about some books, the civilizations that don't create an interconnection between their society, the members of the interdependence, those are the ones that end up collapsing. The ones that have highly structured society and have clarity in terms of the interdependencies between each other, they tend to survive. So I think from a civilization perspective, it would be a shame to ignore some of the threats we have as overall society and not do that through governances or non-NGOs or whatever.
So there have been previous large civilizations which have collapsed due to mismanagement of their environment because it was outside their understanding at that stage. It's a little bit like my slide number 2 when I had these various animals, eat, survive, reproduce, eat, survive, reproduce, eat, survive, reproduce, and they didn't have enough foresight to understand. So the human societies in the past generally lacked enough foresight, but we're different. So we can realise that if we don't change things, then things will go badly.
But that would push it more towards progressive.
I want to move through a few more slides and then we open up the discussion. I would like to give each of you, by the way, permission to stand up and stretch for a moment because you've been sitting down for an hour. So if you do want to...
I'd like to suggest that Moore's law is a multivariant thing, and it's often looked at simplistically as a doubling of one specific thing, but power consumption has so decreased over the same period that if we look at that, then we go, well, obviously Moore's law is quite on track. So it's a bunch of things, and
it's not just one
it's
technology.
easy to dismiss.
Yeah. If you just focus on one technology, you miss the big picture.
Decentralization.
Okay. Question here.
Henry, can I make one observation?
Wait a minute until people calm down. I took a risk in telling people to stretch. And I'd like to get this meeting back under control again. But I think it is important to loosen up a bit. All right. So we are back on track, and we have a comment. I've forgotten your name already.
Henry.
Henry. Yes.
Yeah, I was just as a reaction to a comment from behind me a moment ago, which suddenly frightened me in a very disturbing way. Which is if we take the concept of longevity escape velocity and combine that with the trend towards inequality, doesn't that therefore mean that the quote-unquote 1% will live forever and prevent that technology being available to the 99%?
So that is exactly the theme of my second part of my talk.
It's very frightening.
Let's set that up. Let's move on if you don't mind. So, in terms of is there growing inequality? In terms of whether there is more inequality, I have Warren Buffett to back up my case that there is greater inequality. Warren Buffett, one of the richest people in the world, generally thought to be a very nice guy. He gives a lot of his personal wealth to philanthropy. There's a class war being going on for the last 20 years, and my class, that's the rich class, has won. We're the ones that have gotten our tax rates reduced dramatically. And he has various figures. He looked at the wealthiest 400 taxpayers in 1992 with average income 40 million, and their tax rate was already low, only 29%, But if you go forward to 2010, they were earning a heck of a lot more money, and their tax rate had gone down to 21%. So they have done nicely out of this. But there is another view to this, of course. They say, well, that's not really a problem, because the government would rather have 21% of this than 29% of that, wouldn't they? So there is a kind of counter-argument saying, well, we can cope with a bit of inequality, that's all right. So that's what I want to explore next a bit further. There's lots of charts that show the change in salaries. So this one here shows what's happened to people's salaries in America. We'll look at other countries shortly. In America over the last 30 years, and most people's salaries haven't changed much in real terms. So this blue line is people in the middle, 41st to 60th percentile, the salary hasn't changed much. Even the top 20%, if you take off the top 1%, if you leave the rest of the top 20%, their salary has only roughly doubled in real terms. And it hasn't actually done much recently. Whereas the top 1%, their salaries have gone up. Take home, it is what, income growth has gone up sometimes fourfold, a little drop back recently, but it's more than 3 times as much. There are many ways of looking at this chart, and because I was in France, I had to use this chart from a French economist, Thomas Piketty, from his recent book Capital, in which he looked at the share of income inequality. So what this shows here is the share of the top 10% in national income, and it's been very high before, way back in ancient history, 1920s, 1930s, came down for a long time, but it's been growing and growing and growing recently, so that the top 10% has got much more than before. The book was actually prepared a while ago. The figures have been updated recently by one of his research colleagues, Emmanuel Suarez at Berkeley, which shows that it's now gone higher than ever before, more than 50% in there. And various people looked at it different ways. The Economist, which is a fairly conservative magazine in some ways, says, you know, the really, really rich are getting much, much richer. And this chart shows that the top 1% is earning as much as the bottom 90%. And if you drill into that top 0.1%, if you take a tenth of that, so the 100th of 1%, their salary is now 11% of the total wealth of America, which is back to the highest it's ever been historically. Is that a worry? We'll see. It's not just the US, but the US is the most severe case perhaps, but the UK, other Anglo-Saxon countries, in the French term, are following the same route. And many other developing countries are doing the same. The inequality is increasing in many countries. In terms of Russia, might be a seat way over there perhaps if you want. In terms of Russia, I don't have a chart for picking it from that, but I do have this recent report from Credit Suisse, which says that Russia has the highest level of wealth inequality in the whole world, apart from a few of the Caribbean islands, which happen to have a single billionaire living there, that distorts the statistics. But according to Credit Suisse, a mere 110 Russian citizens control 35% of the wealth in that country. So they're not a role model either. Now, this poses 3 questions that I've been hitting at. Does this really matter, or is this just something that is all right because, after all, everybody's going to benefit? There's a trickle-down effect, and although some people do very well, everybody else is going to benefit too. I'm going to look at that with various points of view. Secondly, I want to explore to what extent technology is likely to make inequality worse, because the phenomenon I was looking at in the first half of my talk, with more and more technology in play, how is that changing the inequality statistics? After all, things are becoming cheaper, maybe everybody can benefit. And there are positive feedback cycles in technology, as we've been discussing. And then last, I'm going to look at some scenarios which are credible. I'm going to try and actually look at 4 different scenarios which we can look at, and then consider how we can avoid the escalation of inequality. What is the role of politics, if any? What's the role of philosophy, and possibly the role of technology? So under the first of these questions, I'm going to answer this in 3 ways actually as well. I'm going to say that inequality is a problem for everybody, not just for the poor in society. An inequality, a more unequal society in many ways is worse for everybody. Then I'm going to look not just at equality of outcome, which is what is your income, but I'm going to look at equality of opportunity, which is what is your potential to change your income and to step up from a state of relative poverty through a middle class into a state of relative well-being. And we look at the phenomenon of the disappearing middle class, and then I'm going to argue that because the situation is actually getting worse, it's becoming more explosive, and technology will actually risk making it even more explosive, which is why we have to pay serious attention to this. In terms of the argument why equality is better for everyone, I'm going to refer to some slides from The Spirit Level, which is an interesting book. It's controversial in its own way, but I think it's got lots of fascinating data. Does anybody admits to having read this book here, The Spirit Level? Yeah, Will?
Thought it was great.
Thought it was great? So by a couple of British academics, Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett, and they have made all their slides available online, which is great. So I'm just cherry pick some of these slides for the next few minutes. I will put my slides on SlideShare as well, so you can benefit from them. So my slides will contain my copies of the slides from Spirit Level. So they look at all the richest countries in the world according to various criteria, and they rank them here according to inequality of income. So the most unequal countries here, the USA and Portugal, and the most equal countries down here. So of course there is inequality in Japan. There are rich people in Japan, but nothing like as many, same as in Sweden. And that's on this axis, inequality. And on this axis, this is a kind of the conclusion chart. They put an index of health and social problems. So the higher up here, the more health problems you've got, such as poorer literacy, poorer infant mortality, more homicides, more imprisonments, more teenage deaths, and so on. And there's quite a close correlation, as you can see. The more unequal the income, the worse society is generally. And it's not just between countries. They repeated the data inside the 51 states of the United States. Let me just backtrack there. What they did is this: if you list them instead by absolute income, so you put the richest countries over here like Norway, Ireland, and USA, then there's no correlation. There's only correlation when you look at the inequality rather than the absolute size of the wealth. If you break it down, as I was going to say, into the states, if you look at the different states in America, the same pattern broadly applies. So the states up here like Louisiana, Missouri, and Alabama, which have got lots of income inequality, also tend to be the states with the highest number of social problems. States down here such as what? New Hampshire, Iowa, Utah, Vermont, which have got on the whole less inequality, also on the whole have got less issues. There are a few outliers which people think might invalidate the data, like New York or Arkansas, but we'll come and talk about that in a moment. And you can look at individual things like mental illness is worse in states, in countries with greater inequality. Infant mortality is worse in states with more inequality. More imprisonment in more unequal countries. And as not surprisingly, there's less trust in more unequal countries. More homicide, more murders. And this applies not just at the country level, it applies at the state level too. If you don't want to be murdered, then don't go in a country where there's in a state where there's lots of inequality. And not surprisingly, the overall life expectancy goes down. So if you want to have a long life expectancy, it might suggest it's better to go be in a country where there's less inequality. Now, many of you have probably got red bells going off in your head saying, hang on, correlation doesn't imply causation, and there's other explanations to go for. And indeed, there's been a real ding-dong battle over the analysis in this book. And if you're interested, I would recommend this video from the RSA, the Royal Society of Arts here in the UK, where two of the very clever critics, Peter Saunders and Christopher Snowden, from separate ways, try and tear apart the analysis and land some good blows in the process. But then you hear the two protagonists, Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson, I think defend themselves very well too. It's a good example of a debate. And I think the conclusion is, yes, there are other factors going on, but a more unequal society has more stress and strain for natural reasons. There's more envy, there's more bitterness, there's more jealousy, there's more strife, and therefore there are, not surprisingly, more health issues and social issues. But worse than that, and I quote here, some of you might recognize, President of the United States, saying this is his definition of the defining problem of our time, defining challenge of our time. It's something that's been dear to the heart of America throughout its whole history, is being jeopardized by this growing inequality. And the basic bargain has been that even though you are poor, even though you are born impoverished, even though you have an inequality of income, you can work hard. You can live the American dream. You can be lifted up and get ahead in a way that you haven't done before. And Obama's analysis and others' analysis is that this actual conveyor belt opportunity is worse than before too. He said, we never promised equal outcomes, but they have strived to give equal opportunity. And that is now coming under some stress. As this chart, don't take it too literally, it's not drawn by Excel, but there's a chart showing from the Technology Review recently the decline in the ladder. So if you're down here, it's much harder to get ahead than they were before. And this is also summarized by this picture of an endangered species. It's not just the blue whale that's endangered, it's not just the cheetah that's endangered, it's the middle class that are in some ways endangered. Why? Because if you look at what's happening to the salaries according to the kind of education, the kind of other things in life, you're all right if you've got a really good degree, a PhD or more, but the people who've got less, the salary has gone up a bit, but it hasn't gone up much. And in fact, if you trace it back to 1972, it hasn't gone up much. Hardly any change, even for people with normal degrees over that period. And most other people's salaries have declined. It's particularly so in America, but it applies in other countries too in Europe. So there is this growing gulf, which, as Obama goes on to say, is that there are diminished levels of upward mobility in recent years. If you're born into that top 20%, you've got 2 or 3 chances of staying there. And some fall out, some people fall on hard times, some people mess up their lives, and they're no longer there. But if you're born in the bottom 20%, then today you've got a less than 1 in 20 shot at migrating to the top. So that American dream is no longer working so well. You're 10 times likelier to stay where you are in that case. And you might say, well, he's a Democrat. Of course he's going to say that. So my next evidence comes from one of the richest people in America. Have you seen this guy? Nick Hanauer? Ringing any bells? He recently wrote an article talking about his wealth and other people's wealth. He was one of the earliest investors in Amazon, before Amazon was famous. So he's made a lot of money out of the growing prominence of Amazon. He had made a few other very skillful investments too. But he says, frankly speaking, he's not the cleverest guy. He just happened to be well-placed and reasonably lucky. He says the problem isn't that we've got inequality. A certain amount of inequality is sort of inevitable in society. It's at historically high levels. That's what these previous charts are showing. It's at historically high levels. What's more, people know that it's at historically high levels. It's communicated. It's getting worse every day. And we're back in the situation of France, which I was talking about in France 2 weeks ago. We're back in the situation of France before the revolution. And I'm not an expert on the French Revolution, but I don't think it was very nice, especially for the rich people. And he says, I have a message for my fellow filthy rich. All of those of us who live in our gated bubble worlds, wake up. It won't last. The pitchforks are coming to address this inequities. And do you know what a pitchfork is? Yeah. Simpsons had an episode of pitchforks coming after people. And he says, you know, no society can sustain this kind of rising inequality. Either we're going to have a police state or we're going to have an uprising. And we don't yet have an uprising, but we have Google buses, which are ferrying their reasonably wealthy employees from San Francisco down the valley to Mountain View, and they have to have security protection because although people aren't throwing pitchforks yet, they are throwing stones from time to time at these buses because they feel, you know, this new rich with their lovely spacious coaches and free Wi-Fi and free games and free food. It's a kind of something to be envious about. So it's under control now, but who knows where it's going. And there are reasons to think that it is going to get worse. And there are 5 factors that are going to lock in this. Piketty has one explanation. Piketty has an equation. Maybe you know Piketty's equation? R is greater than G, and I used to be a mathematician. I managed to confine myself to just one equation for this presentation. But it means that if you invest money, if you've got money and invested, it's likely to grow faster than just the normal growth in the economy. So rich will benefit more. This is the bulk of many hundred pages of analysis, which I think is true. If you've got money, you can invest it, you make even more money, more likely than climbing up. And so the conveyor belt is separating the people below from the people above. Education, of course, historically, has been one means by which rich people have sent their children to good schools. I admit, I sent my offspring to a good school, which was expensive, and he has benefited as a result. It's a long time process. Of course, other people do make their way up from poorer backgrounds, but seems to be happening less than before. So that's a second kind of factor. But increasingly technology is magnifying things further, and we're coming up with something called the winner-takes-all scenario. Let me talk about an example of winner-takes-all. Instagram. Have you anybody used Instagram here? I can't believe it's one of these newfangled camera apps on the phones that does smart things with cameras. It's quite a young company. It was formed October 2010 and was snapped up by Facebook 18 months later for, how much did they pay? $1 billion in cash and stock. So they must have had lots of people working there to be worth $1 billion.
They had a lot of Facebook investors. They had a lot of Facebook investors there.
Like on this slide before, I think
cashing in.
I'm told there were 13 employees there, right? Including about 3 software engineers. So is Facebook completely stupid to do this? Well, actually they had their own economic logic because they had 100 million registered users, and Facebook said, you know, I'd quite like these 100 million registered users to be part of our system.
And most of the investors were Facebook owners. So they were able to cash in through that way. I just want to say that it's not just about the fantasticness of this, because the underlying sort of subtle bits are, it makes more clarity of what's going on.
Yeah.
So Instagram had 100 million users, definitely worth $100 million. $1 per user is not uncommon. But the $1 billion was a lot of the Facebook being able to, people who are investors, to be able to cash in without cashing out.
So there's a skullduggery.
Not skullduggery, just the way investment works.
Yes. So investment gives you more money. That's sort of Piketty's first explanation.
Accelerating returns.
Accelerating returns. So this app was usable, and it was very sociable, and so there was a reason for Facebook to get it. But was it worth this much? And we heard the discussion here from Brian, who thinks maybe it wasn't worth quite that much. But if you compare it with another camera company, if you compare it to Kodak, so was Kodak ever worth $1 billion? It was, and Kodak was worth $30 billion at one stage. But Kodak had a few more than 13 employees. It had 86,000 employees at that stage. So if you do the maths, then it sort of implies that these heroic 13 employees were 2,000 times as valuable as these hard-working Kodak employees. You know? So this is more of a winner-takes-all because their technology was the best and everybody around the world could access it. So who would be interested in using the second best camera app when the first camera app is so easily available? And people have done some analysis, actually, as Brian has mentioned, and said as a result of all of this, it seems like somehow, I'm not sure how the maths works, but 7 billionaires have been created as a result of all this transaction. And if you compare that with the wealthiest person from Kodak, their founder, George Eastman, he never came close to being a billionaire. So, change days. It's not just Instagram, there's WhatsApp, which great application. I use it all the time, I love it. Even though they don't have an apostrophe in the name, I'll forgive them that. They were bought for 19 billion, I'm so sorry. So their productivity was even higher. And well, they did have 420 million active users, so sort of a logic there too. Highly sociable, highly usable. So this has been analysed, and others have been analysed by this fantastic book, which I do recommend, by these two MIT academics, Brynjolfsson and McAfee. They had another book called Race Against the Machine, which did quite a lot of analysis, and they basically updated and extended it. They've got lots of discussion about working with computers. The best chess player isn't a person, it's not even a computer, it's a combination of a human and a computer. But they also look at this winner-takes-all scenario. And I won't go through all their analysis, but they point out 3 factors to do with technology, to do with digitization, to do with the standards, to do with networking, which mean that more and more people find out which is the gold medal application, and they want it, and who cares about the silver medal, because it's, you know, if you can take the best, why don't you take the best? And one more witness for the case here, Steve Jurvetson, another legendary venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, one of the first investors in Hotmail. Some of you may remember. He's on the board of SpaceX and Tesla Motors, 2 of Elon Musk's companies. synthetic genomics as well. He says, it just seems so obvious to me that technology is accelerating the rich-poor gap. It is the elephant in the room, stomping around, banging off the walls that discussions of the future of technology tend to ignore. And what's technology doing? It's also potentially going to take things even further, because as technology makes us stronger and fitter, can you imagine these super titans? They don't need to sleep, you know, they just keep going 24 hours a day at super rates because of these drugs, and especially if they become smarter, especially if their IQ can be boosted by getting a hold early. It's a very expensive technology, as happened in the film Limitless. Some of you remember, wasn't quite that plot line, but the guy who got this technology and they made him smarter ended up, plot spoiler, doing quite well. Plot spoiler. Yes.
I'm not sure I really buy into this so much.
Okay.
I mean, you know, look at the difference between rich and poor. It used to be about the same sort of levels like this back in, say, 1920.
Yeah.
Between 1920 and post-war,
yeah,
the quality got much less due to the politics.
Was it politics just?
Well, it was, wasn't it? It was a situation where the government felt they had to give more money to and sort out the conditions for the poor.
New Deal and stuff like that.
Worse between 1920 and 1945. Do you know what I mean? Technology got better and better and better.
Yeah.
And labour declined. And the amount of labour declined.
Let's have one at a time. So
I think we're missing a massive elephant in the room.
Yeah.
We had one unfinished war, the First World War, and one very bloody war. That's what made it happen. There was a massive eruption that made it happen.
And there was a terrible depression in certain parts of the world.
Exactly. We don't need to go back to French Revolution. We had it very recently.
But the positive side of things is politics can make a difference. You know?
Well, I think it's going to get in cycles. You know, we've reached the same point again. Somebody's going to give, somebody's going to break, and then we're going to go back down to more equality again.
Yeah. Well, lots of times. Matt?
I'm not sure whether it's Diamandis or the State of the Future World Index, but they just say that there may be inequality, but the poor are getting less poor.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter.
The poor have got more things they can spend money on, and the absolute amount of the malnourished people from a certain threshold is decreasing. Yes. So in that sense, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter so much. Callum?
Bill Gates points out that although inequality is allegedly increasing in the States and in Western economies, most Western economies, it's actually decreasing a lot globally. Globally, inequality is decreasing.
Right. So maybe there's less of a worry. The revolutions often happen locally, you know. But as my history teacher told me at school, the French peasants had it better than many other countries in the world.
Yeah, but you know, drawing a parallel between now and what happened just before the French Revolution is very dangerous. People were starving up and down France.
Yeah.
There are not many people starving in the UK.
So they won't rebel because of being starving, but they might rebel for other reasons, which we'll come to. Alex?
What do you think? Because inequality is good for science and technology.
Inequality is good for the development.
Good or bad?
Is it good or bad? Well, I mean, that's what people were arguing. Some inequality makes sense because it spurs people on to catch up.
Yes.
So a certain amount of competition is valuable, but the argument is that it's on risk of tipping too far over. Yes?
I think
Henry?
one thing not to ignore is that there's a very pernicious connection between inequality and regulation via politics, which is the more inequality you get in a society, the more regulatory capture you get in favour of the wealthy, i.e. politics being bought by corporate interests, by wealthy individuals. Going back to your example of Warren Buffett paying less tax.
Okay. Callum?
I think quite the opposite of that happens. The majority of voters are poor, so it's really hard for the rich to buy as many votes as poor people can. Regulatory capture is having a client state of people who want the benefits that are being paid out.
Well, the counter-argument which is made by people in America, such as Lawrence, his name will come to me in a minute, the one who argues that American politics is heavily corrupted by too much finance.
Larry Summers.
Not Larry Summers, no.
Lessig.
Lessig, thank you so much. Lawrence Lessig. His argument is that the elections are determined by the people who are making big financial contributions. They're the ones who have the biggest influence, and so the democratic process is
a lot more true in the States.
Yes, a lot more true in the States in the end. So,
To address this point, the problem is that politics are being bought through lobbying, and the voters, I don't want to step into it, but generally the voters' understanding of what's going on is decreasing, because inequality creates lesser access to education, and people, the electorate is not getting smarter, unfortunately.
I don't think it's any. Every time bills come to the Senate or the House of Representatives for campaign finance reform, it's never succeeded. It's just a self-reinforcing, prophecy. Money drives American politics in a way that's completely different than here.
Thankfully, we're not quite so bad here. Joe?
I'm missing on the discussion, I don't know if that was covered in the event, is the value because of the value of these technologies, what is the influence of the strategic, the defense aspect of it, countries? Because the way it's presented is more or less we are in agreement of countries, but we have the individual countries racing after these technologies. Was that covered? What is the influence? Because even trying to shut down that in one country won't work exactly because other countries are accelerating that.
So that's an argument for why technology can't be shut down and why it's actually hard to regulate it and why we need better global governance in some cases to do that. But there is some track record of a global action on the ozone layer. There was global agreement on what needed to be done. And even in the early days of genetic engineering, there was the Asilomar agreement in 1975 or thereabouts, when people said, hang on until we thought more about it, we're going to voluntarily agree all around the world to avoid various kinds of experiments with recombinant DNA. I mean, I've got the details slightly wrong there, so there was some track record. Olga?
Just a little amazed by the comment by a fellow futurist that inequality helps technology development and then it's good. Until forgetting the premise of why we are futurists and what we want to do about this. We want a better future for everyone.
We want a better future for everybody.
This is a really dangerous comment that if we find something that spurs the technology, let's just allow it to happen. The technology is there to help the people, so let's not forget that important premise. And then most importantly, the question to us, I mean, we are all this interested in the technology, all fantastic, but just seeing these facts that you showed us with inequality, shouldn't we focus more on that? Maybe our energy, let's say, finding the technology that can help us bridge that gap.
So, let me move on, because there's a question here from...
Basically, we're talking about American politics a few minutes ago. Yes, there were quite distant unions.
Some of the same effects are quite worldwide. Some of them, but not perhaps in the same way.
No, what I'm saying is that trend is actually increasing in, for example, in the UK as well. But quite a lot of people are starting to really sway away from politics because they say that the type of language. Secondly, that the actual political classes is basically just become as if an old boys club, and like other countries as well. In all other countries as well, quite a lot of countries.
So that's an argument for saying we can't work with politicians, they're no good, let's do it libertarian ways. My experience of politicians is that actually you can work with them, regardless of their party. If you explain things to them, they're not completely stupid. They may occasionally give the impression, but actually often the heart is in the right place, so I'm in favour of engaging.
David, just one quick...
very quick.
One quick English example of politics going slightly astray. Was on the shelter website, there's certain legislation which is really unfair for poor people, and the debate about this, the shelter, the charity shelter, lobbied and did all sorts of work to get this debate in floored.
Yep.
And two speakers spoke for too long, and they couldn't vote on it.
So democracy isn't quite working. Government, it doesn't...
All it takes is for what in the UK Parliament is for that sort of scenario to happen, because someone's been lobbied or whatever, whatever, some mechanism like that, and politics can, we can forget about voting.
Yes, so we shouldn't have too high an opinion of the British political system either. Right. Let me press on if you don't mind.
So, just one thing, is the government us or them? Because I understand that the government is actually ourselves, and we elect representatives, so they are us.
So we shouldn't be so proud of what we're doing in terms of fair enough. So I think there is this case that accelerating technology, which is doing all the positive things that I mentioned earlier, gives them all these opportunities, is at the same time likely to increase inequality. But as has been coming out in some of the discussion, at the same time it is reducing prices quite remarkably too. And so many of the things which formerly people couldn't afford, even though they're still comparatively poor, they can now afford. So you can go into poor people's houses and they've got flat screen TVs, they're connected to the internet, they've got smartphones, maybe not the very nicest iPhone 6, but they've got an iPhone 4 or whatever.
A lot of it is bought by debt.
A lot of them bought by debt too. So there is a reduction. There is, in principle, that as this accelerates more, that we can create a practical abundance. And let's just look briefly at one last set of slides from Mary Meeker, who does a report every year. It's a very famous report on the state of the internet. Here's from 2014, and she is tracking reducing costs of all kinds of things. The decreasing cost of computing is coming down at roughly 33% annually. The decreasing cost of storage is coming down 38% annually, and we already saw that right at the beginning. You know, there's an improvement in storage. The cost of bandwidth is coming down at 27%, so you can send more and more data, whether it's wired or wireless. Even smartphones are coming down in cost, although it's not quite so significant, because smartphones actually have more and more features in them, but they're still coming down at a certain rate, and the result of that is that more and more people are buying smartphones. In 2009 there were about 30 so million sold every quarter, now it's 10 times as much almost. And so more and more people are getting their hands on this, and it's not just these technologies. If I borrow some slides from the Singularity Summit and from the book that's just been published on exponential organizations that Yuri Van Geest has made available on SlideShare, he gives many other examples of technologies which are much cheaper than before. Industrial robots have come down in cost 23 times in 5 years. Brain-computer interface devices, roughly the same functionality, roughly 44 times cheaper in 5 years, according to their research. Drones, you know, if you want to play with drones, used to be pretty expensive. They're still quite expensive, but they're 142 times cheaper in 6 years. 3D printing, 400 times cheaper in 7 years. So that's coming along in leaps and bounds. And the daddy of them all, as shown in another slide, this actually claims that the price is already down to $1,000. That might be just on the borderline of being true, but 10,000 times coming down in 7 years. So in lots of ways, technology, it might be increasing the relative inequality between the rich and the poor, but maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it doesn't matter because of this extra practical abundance. And people will have good food to eat, people will have things that they can enjoy, and maybe that inequality will go. That leads me to the first of the 4 scenarios I'm going to talk about. But just on this slide briefly, I want to point out that at the same time as technology making some things cheaper, it's creating at the same time fabulous new technology, including fabulous new medical technology, which probably will only be available to start off with to people who are on the upper end of that spectrum. So although we might say that certain things are becoming cheaper, other things aren't. So briefly then, these 4 future scenarios, and then probably we should break up for our discussion again. 4 future scenarios. The first is that there will be inequality, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because people will have plenty of good things. Even if they're comparatively poor in society, they may not have the biggest yachts, but they will have enough goods. They'll be happy and acquiescent. They might spend a lot of time watching wonderful TV, soap operas, you know, skating on ice, dancing on ice. Britain's Got Talent, X Factor. That will keep everybody happy. And they'll be kept happy in virtual worlds. And this might remind you of a famous novel, Brave New World, written by Aldous Huxley, in which he said, well, there's this drug called Soma, which keeps people sufficiently complacent and sufficiently happy, and so that's all right. That's scenario 1, which is a possible future. I don't think it will happen, because I think that even though many people will be comfortable, others will still say, you know, I've got food in my belly, but I'm missing out some important things. You know, And so the second scenario for the future is that we will end up with some kind of pitchforks revolution, because, as I said, some things are cheaper, but there are still some things which are restricted for just the ones who are very wealthy. And there will be more of these pitchforks or guillotines, or worse, with people who have access to weapons of mass destruction. You know, the cyber terrorists might knock down the internet. North Korea can do quite a lot, even though it's not the richest country in the world, in terms of destroying our cyber security. A few years more time, some clever but angry, disaffected people who see that they are somehow on the misfortunate side of this equation can go mad and do terrible things. So that's kind of second scenario, which I certainly hope we avoid. The third scenario is that the police state gets even smarter, even cleverer. I might call it transhumanism for the 1%, and that there are a certain number of people who take advantage of very cutting-edge, expensive brain enhancements. They make their brains better, their muscles better. They give the police force great powers, and basically we get a big brother is watching you, though we may not realise we've been watched. And anybody who starts even to think about pitchforks or similar will be spied on in advance, and that power will be taken out of their hands. They might be given extra doses of soma or whatever. So that is another possible scenario. But I think that's a terrible, terrible world, and so I'm advocating this transhumanism for all, transhumanism for the 100%, in which we recognise these social forces which I looked at, and we get more involved in social pressures to ensure access to everybody by creating new social structures, just in the same way as we hope we can create new bodies, you know. Some people say you shouldn't create new bodies because evolution's done very well, and if you tinker with evolution, you're probably going to make a mistake. And I say, yes, it's true, but we can be wise and we can learn. That's genetic engineering. Some people say, you know, free market economies evolved through a lot of ups and downs. It's got this invisible hand. We shouldn't try and tinker with that. I say exactly the same thing, that we can be smart, we can improve on it more. And that is my argument for pushing for what I have called not just a techno-libertarianism, but a techno-progressive approach. And there's more I'm prepared, but seeing as it's 7 minutes to 4, I'm going to advocate here that we get involved to an extent in, get involved in what some of us at the Paris event called a techno-progressive declaration, in which we say that the world is unacceptably equal and dangerous, and it could make things worse. Too few people understand what to do. We must now get a little bit more involved than before in political engagement and influence the course of events. So that is what we're looking for people to look at this declaration, and if they like all of it, this is only the first of 6 kind of pages. If you do like it, then let me know, and we'll put more of your names on the website. There's already about 100 people from different countries who supported it, and if you think it makes sense, then let me know. So thank you very much for listening so patiently, and I wish that we can make this a future in which everybody will benefit, rather than there being a police state and draconian troubles. Thank you. We'll take a short while of questions. There's one over there.
Yeah, I've just got 2 questions I just want to ask real quick. When you talk about technology and us becoming transhuman, indirectly, it's almost like we're going to end up becoming like Borgs.
Not necessarily.
No, if we're looking at like technological advancement, because our biological bodies are always going to constantly be competing with the environment. So if someone else has got a more advanced technology within themselves, somewhere we are equally going to say, okay, fine, we have to technologically improve ourselves. In that way, we end up becoming more Borgish, right? I mean,
Borg in the sense of in Star Trek when there's a
basically hive mind type of thing, right?
Hive mind. Brian, do you know anything about hive mind, don't you?
I certainly do.
Brian is a hive himself.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have any hives, but one announcement for anyone who's into some more advanced fiction of the world of the future. Some friends of mine are a stage company that specializes in science fiction called Stars or Mars Theater Productions, and they tonight, for the last show, have a great play called Some. And it's about a technology that will change the concepts of self and other, love and death. Following the pioneering technology of the new hive mind, we follow the stories of 6 individuals who can be cast gender blind in their experiences of this new life. Some follows these characters who have entered this contract. The hive mind enables them to share their thoughts and feelings in a much more intimate way than the illusions of our social media. They question the concepts that we have accepted since time began: love, birth, war, and loss. Who is the pioneer of this technology? Who will use it for good, whatever that means in this reality? And who will use it to further their own ends? Should everyone be able to connect? So it's 7:30 tonight. It's at Clapham North Station. It's actually at the...
You've seen this, Brian?
Pardon?
You've seen this?
I saw it last night and it's fantastic, and I recommend it for anyone who's an advanced futurist, because it's like, someone wrote something for us! Woo! If you're not an advanced futurist...
I must say that there are many other scenarios of the future beyond, instead of all...
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely.
So
that's right.
If you sign up for more technology, it doesn't mean you're going to break down all the barriers between your brain and other people's brains. At least that's my view.
So if you want to see some interesting theater, I just want to say, find me and I'll tell you all about it.
So let's go back to so I think that's one possible scenario, and I think we have to think ahead whether that's something we like. I don't think that's the only scenario.
No, I know it's not the only scenario, but basically, I see personally, this is my outlook, I see a split in between almost like the biologists, which are people who want to remain very non-technological, and then another set of people that are way technological and basically, as I said, the Borgish type.
So I think you probably missed that part of the presentation, but I said in the beginning, I don't think biologists and technologists are going to remain separate. There is going to be more and more of a merger. We're going to be using technological means to enhance biology, and we're going to be learning from biology as we improve our technology.
Okay. And then my second part was in regards to the inequality between the rich and the poor.
Yeah.
I don't think necessarily we should understand the rich and the poor in the terms of stuff, of things. I think it's more important to understand the rich and the poor in terms of time, because that's the only real, how can I put it, valuable asset to any conscious being. It's the time and the use of their time and what they can acquire with the time they have. And with the poor, they have a limited amount of time for the stuff that the rich can acquire with the same type of time. That's all.
So I think we can analyse inequality more fully. I think just looking at the rich and poor is only a kind of a bit of a blunt way of doing it, as you say. So one of the feedbacks I had from my talk in Paris, and I give the same one, is we need to do a bit more analysis to think which kind of inequality are important, which can we fix, which are the ones we can't fix. And so I'm agreeing with you there. Now, Callum, I think you were next.
Congratulations, I think this is the best lecture I've ever been to from the Socialist Workers' Party. I think it's terrific. I think what you're doing, David, is slightly dangerous. I think you're tying the London Futurist group to an overtly soft left going on fairly hard left political agenda. And clearly it's popular. Most of the people in this room, I suspect, agree with that idea. I think it's dangerous because you will alienate a lot of potential futurists. I think also another thing that will happen is that if this is a growing European approach, you're going to have a schism growing up between the American more libertarian approach and the European more communitarian approach. Now, I think there's quite a lot wrong with the American libertarian approach, and there's also a lot wrong with the idea of a sort of soft left communitarian approach. There's nothing wrong with the market. The market works, it's good. Market failure is what we need to tackle, not excesses of market. But overall, I think you're linking up of a futurist movement or group with a political one. I think that's regrettable.
There's not linking up of one branch of politics. The idea is to engage across the...
There's a very clear political agenda here, David. You know, identifying inequality as a big and growing problem and the thing that we have to address is a very left-wing agenda.
Yeah, so I should say, I don't necessarily agree, personally agree, it is the most important problem. I was putting these quotes from other people there, but I do think it is an issue that we ignore at our peril. If we ignore it at our peril, things will get a lot worse. Right.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I vehemently disagree with your view. I think you have presented a very balanced view and have even in the equality side put forward thoughts from a broad spectrum of people. And my question was going to be regarding a future potentially very dangerous and destructive that is missing from your scenarios, from your conclusion, which is a potential conflict on a global scale between the part of our human civilization which is in favor of a broad technological advancement, and a group of people, nations, ideologies, philosophies that are completely on a different track and very much into philosophies that do not subscribe to that and which are quite irreconcilable. So, religious fundamentalism and those kind of movements which are on the rise and which are taking a vast portion of humanity into very, very dangerous space. And I think what's missing in this futuristic scenario planning is the inevitable large-scale conflict between these two ideologies.
Interesting. Okay, I agree. I don't quite address that there. Where should I go next? Joe?
Yeah, just saying that as a techno-libertarian, I think your presentation was quite balanced, so I didn't feel excluded.
You're a techno-libertarian, but you didn't feel excluded. I call myself a collaborative transhumanist. I want to ensure that the best brains are able to work together. I just want to recognise that some of the issues on here probably can't be addressed without getting involved in politics, and politics means probably working with people that are not necessarily our first choice as friends. Roxana?
Can we go back to those 4 scenarios, please? Sort of building on the comment that the lady in the front row just made, I think both inequality accepted and inequality controlled are very short-term solutions, inevitably leading to eruption regardless. Come from a country which you mentioned, which is up there on the scale on inequality, and Russians tried both of them. Inequality control both in pre-revolution and after revolution, and equality accepted in the last 20 years. And every single time it ended up in massive eruption and lots of blood led, essentially. So I see your first and third scenario as number 2 scenario, just a bit postponed.
Okay, Olga?
Yeah, just exactly building on the same point. I guess the origin shows similarity in thinking. I think we already live in these scenarios, and I would actually say that you almost put them chronologically. Inequality accepted is where we are today. We have massive inequality and we are accepting it. And then I think we'll have a hybrid of the two, or maybe already emerging, inequality controlled and some eruptions here and there. And then if we don't solve it with the 4th scenario, then we will be in the bloodshed and trouble for a long ever after. And fantastic initiative. Thank you very much with the memorandum you mentioned. And please make it big. Don't make it a small group of people. Let's use social media. We all have friends who feel strongly about it. Let's distribute it.
So, 2 things about the declaration. We said we'll gather signatories and gather feedback between now and the end of December, and then we'll decide how to launch it. So it's sort of soft launched on the web page, which I mentioned down here, which is, skip past this is far too ambitious slide. This one here, the IEET, has got this declaration. I am also going to run a hangout tomorrow night. Some of you may know I'm running a hangout with which various people from the European Humanity Plus movements are discussing again about this declaration and what we should do with it, and different approaches. And I'm sure some of the views that Callum mentioned will be raised during that, because there are people who feel that this is a little bit too left-wing, and my view has always been it's not left-wing or right-wing, it's up-wing, that's what we should get to. But in the end, some of these issues are there. Right, Mark?
So I love where Elon Musk comes from, just to speak from Callum's perspective, where Elon Musk comes from, where he's actually talking about catalyzing markets. So he catalyzes the car market. He's looking for the benefit for mankind, and he's using the current infrastructure doing that. That's working with what we've got, doing a brilliant job with it. He was actually interviewed by the chap, the venture capitalist that you mentioned earlier. Brilliant interview.
Okay, so we need more like that. Any final comments from anybody who hasn't said anything yet? Yes, please.
On the sort of positive scenario, just like technology is inevitable, I think that the human ability through initiatives like yours and is inevitable that we will find a way to merge competition and cooperation so that we survive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the challenge. How do we get the right mix of competition and cooperation? I think there is more cooperation happening. The third sector, the voluntary sector, is growing in importance. That's what I'm trying to say here. There is a growing collaborative commons, which was open source, in which people share things freely because they are very low cost. So this will grow, but at the same time we need to revise how capitalism works. You know, it works well in a great deal of the circumstances. Sometimes it gets biased because of crony capitalism, vested interests, and other market failures. And that's what we want to try and guide without being a dead hand to innovation and stopping it. And many people have talked about it. It's not an easy thing to do. But I think if we have enough of a vision of a positive progress, then we can do it. Any final comments from anybody who hasn't spoken yet? You shell-shocked at sitting through the Socialist Party lecture. What we'll do next is that I know some people have got to rush off and do Christmas shopping or just go and lie down or whatever, but the others who wish are welcome to stay around with us and migrate to a nearby pub. There's directions on the posters outside, or you can come along with us to the pub. It's Marlborough Arms, which is just a short walk, 5 minutes walk away. Well, we can continue this discussion with some wet throats rather than dry throats. Good idea. Okay, let's call it quits there. Thank you.